I'm here to report that there is nothing wrong in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin is fine. Wisconsin is great, actually. Despite what you may have heard about Wisconsin's finances, Wisconsin is on track to have a budget surplus this year. I am not kidding. I'm quoting their own version of the Congressional Budget Office, the state's own nonpartisan assess the state's finances agency. That agency said the month that the new Republican governor of Wisconsin was sworn in last month that the state was on track to have a $120 million budget surplus this year. So then why exactly does Wisconsin look like this right now? Why is there a revolt in the American Midwest tonight? Why are we in day 3 of massive, massive protests? Real upheaval in Wisconsin's capital city of Madison. Why are we seeing what was described today by my friend John Nichols, a 7th-generation Wisconsinite, as perhaps the biggest protests that have been seen in that state since Vietnam? Why is this? Look at this. Why is this happening? As the state's own finances show, it is not happening because people who work for the state are the cause of some horrible budget crisis. It's not because teachers are lazy and rich. It's not because greedy snowplow drivers have bankrupted the state somehow. The state is not bankrupt. Even though the state had started the year on track to have a budget surplus, now there is, in fact, a $137 million budget shortfall. Republican Governor Scott Walker, coincidentally, has given away $140 million worth of business tax breaks since he came into office. Hey, wait, that's about exactly the size of the shortfall. What is happening in Wisconsin right now has absolutely nothing to do with public workers. The headline here, the way this keeps getting shorthanded, is workers angry after state is forced by budget crisis to crack down. That's not what's going on. The state is not being forced to crack down. A lot of states do have budget crises right now, but heading into this year, Wisconsin was not one of them. The main headline that you are seeing right now about this remarkable thing, look at these images, this remarkable thing that's going on in the American Midwest, the headlines you are seeing about this are mostly wrong. Because what's going on right now in the American Midwest is about Republicans versus Democrats. It is about politics. It is about who wins the next election and the elections after that. That's what's going on right now in Wisconsin. This is about the survival of the Democratic Party. There are parts of the story that actually don't make any sense unless you understand that. One thing that doesn't make sense, Wisconsin's Republican governor, this guy Scott Walker, has proposed essentially dismantling all of the unions for everybody who works for the government, right? That's what this is all about. He has proposed dismantling the unions for people who work for the government, except for cops and firefighters and state troopers. Why are they exempt? Is it because they're all law enforcement and emergency services, therefore they need unions more than other state employees? Well, it can't really be that because corrections officers are among those who are getting the shaft, while the cops and the firefighters and the state troopers are specifically exempt. Okay, what's the other thing that's true about these 3 specific unions who are exempted from this crackdown? Cops, firefighters, and state troopers. What's the other thing about them? Oh, those are the 3 exact unions that supported the Republican governor in the last election. So they get taken care of, everybody else gets dismantled. That should have been the first hint that this maybe was about politics and not about a fiscal crisis. Here's another hint. If this union busting thing that's on the table right now is all supposedly about fiscal realities, it's all nothing personal, we just got to take these dramatic actions, we got to save some money, then why does this supposed budget bill have stuff in it with no fiscal impact at all? Stuff that saves the state of Wisconsin no money, brings in no additional revenue, cuts no spending. Stripping collective bargaining rights from specific groups of people who work for the state is something that has zero fiscal impact. So why do that? What's happening in Wisconsin right now is not about a budget. This is about elections. This is about the Republican Party going after the institutions that make it possible for Democrats to win elections in America. I think that people sometimes confuse the idea of liberal with the idea of optimist. I am living proof that these two things do not always coincide. I'm pretty much as liberal as they come. I generally see things as darkly as you possibly can. Like, you know how people say the people united can never be defeated? My version of that has always been the people united make a bigger target. You've probably also seen this liberal bumper sticker at some point in your life, right? It's the one fish that looks really calm and happy, about to get eaten by the even bigger fish. But that bigger fish is actually made up of tiny little fish that have organized themselves into a fish shape. Right? The idea here is that small numbers of people organized together can defeat large enemies. It's nice, right? This is a nice liberal idea. But I have always imagined that to have a third element. See, I told you I'm the dark cloud. Yes, it is great to have a whole lot of tiny little fish organized and doing the same thing. That can be very impressive. But if a giant sharky fish comes along, then all those little fish can go in one big sharky bite. It is not sweet or sentimental, but that is the rough and illiberal and basic mathematical truth of politics, particularly of money in politics. It is great to have a lot of like-minded people individually, doing their own thing, pulling for the cause. It is great. It's often heartwarming to see it. But what is really, really great is to have some freaking heavy hitters on your side when it's important for you to win. To have institutions, organizations, committees, PACs, political parties that can make big impact political moves, that can keep up with or even outspend the organizations on the other side. There's a reason that all those oil billionaires that Karl Rove has on speed dial, there is a reason that those oil billionaires don't just make their own individual I'm an oil billionaire campaign contributions. They pool all of their money in Karl Rove's American Crossroads organization, so then Karl Rove can make multi-million-dollar impact moves in election years. It is nice to have a lot of little fish, but sometimes it is the biggest fish that eats the best. In 2008, the groups that spent the most money on elections that year were the Chamber of Commerce, the giant right-wing PAC Freedom's Watch, the National Rifle Association, and hey, wait, what are all those weird little initials? Oh, yes, Service Employees International Union and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the Public Employees Union. In 2010, post Citizens United, 7 of the top 10 outside spending groups in the election were all right-wing. Chamber of Commerce, both of Karl Rove's groups, the American Future Fund, Americans for Job Security, all of these right-wing groups, the only non-conservative groups that cracked the top 10 were the Public Employees Union, the SEIU, and the Teachers Union. That's it. Unions are the only competition Republicans have in electoral politics. Post Citizens United, conservatives look at this and they smell blood. I mean, compare this to 2008. They have knocked the unions down to 6th and 7th place. Without unions, essentially all of the big money in politics would be right-wing money. All of it. That is not hyperbole. All of it. Unions are the only players. They are the only fish of any size on the liberal side. And, it is nice to think, well, I have this really awesome PTA group. Bake sales. I've got a meet-up, drinking liberally book club honk for peace thing that I do on Wednesdays. We could probably raise some money. It is true that those are good things. It does all matter, but nothing matters as much as this. I realize it is not romantic sounding, but this is really how it works in politics. This decides who wins elections and who loses them. And if Republicans can use public policy to destroy their only competition for big political money, if they can use public policy to destroy the only major institutions that help Democratic causes at election time, then Republicans can run the table. Beyond just the money, though, a move like this also destroys the get out the vote and organizational capacity of unions, which makes a huge difference on Election Day. You may remember we went to Nevada to cover the Harry Reid-Sharon Angle Senate race right before the elections in November. Essentially, every poll in the state said Sharon Angle was going to win that race. But you know who was working their butts off for their chosen candidate, who was Harry Reid? These guys were. The Culinary Workers Union in Las Vegas. This is what we saw. We shot this footage ourselves. We got on the ground in Nevada just days before the election. Culinary Union working around the clock, going door to door to round up votes for Harry Reid, to get people to the polls on Election Day and to get them there for early voting.
Nevada has 2 weeks of early voting, so we try to do turnout every day because It's convenient, it's easy, and it's a lot quicker than on election day. Obviously, we'll do election day too, but more than half the vote will be in early voting, so it's important.
If you were a Republican politician and you had the chance to dismantle an organization like that, an organization that was helping the other side, wouldn't you do it? What's happening in Wisconsin right now is about Republicans versus Democrats. It is about elections. We saw the same thing with Acorn. You remember the right-wing jihad against Acorn? What did Acorn do to earn that? Well, Acorn, for years, registered huge numbers of minority voters and poor voters. Minority voters and poor voters overwhelmingly vote Democratic when they vote. There were not any real problems with the way that Acorn registered people. This whole Acorn voter fraud epidemic was essentially made up out of whole cloth. The only problem with Acorn and its voter registration is that they were really good at it, and that helped Democrats. You know what else Acorn did? They did really smart political organizing and really smart political strategy. They put things like raise the minimum wage proposals on the ballot in states that had key elections. Why is that important? Well, first, raising the minimum wage is a nice thing to do for poor people. It's also nice for the economy as a whole, it turns out. Second, when you ask people if they want to raise the minimum wage, people essentially unanimously scream yes. It almost always passes, and it almost always passes by large margins. But third, raising the minimum wage is such a popular idea that there's some evidence it actually causes people to go out and vote who would not otherwise vote. It raises voter turnout, particularly among liberal voters, who then, since they're there anyway, are likely to also cast their votes for Democratic politicians. They are there already. What anti-gay marriage ballot initiatives are to Republican voter turnout, we all learned that lesson. Higher minimum wage ballot initiatives are to Democratic voter turnout. And Acorn spearheaded that. Smart. Acorn was not a Democratic organization, but Acorn's work was very politically beneficial to the Democratic Party, and so therefore the right decided that Acorn had to be destroyed. And unions. Unions are not democratic organizations, but unions' work is beneficial to the Democratic Party. They are the only institution of any side on the liberal side of the equation. Corporate America, all of corporate America, is on the Republican side. The only institutions of any size, with any heft at all, on the liberal side are the unions. So, of course, they too must be destroyed. This is an existential fight for the Democratic Party. This is about whether or not the Democratic Party exists. This is why Republicans want to do this so bad. If you break the public sector unions in Wisconsin, then you can break them anywhere. And if you break them everywhere, then it is bake sales versus billionaires for not only this next election, but for every election here on out. Republicans run the table. Bake sales on one side, billionaires on the other. That's it. This is an existential fight for the Democratic Party. And Democrats who don't get that are being willfully ignorant. This is an existential fight for the Democratic Party, and that's why Democrats in Wisconsin are doing what they are doing right now in Wisconsin. That's why Wisconsin looks the way it does right now. That's why the streets of Madison were shut down to traffic today, because of the sheer number of people who turned out. That's why people slept in the Capitol Rotunda overnight. That's why the state legislature looked like this today. Democratic legislators wearing orange T-shirts that read "Assembly Democrats Fighting for Working Families." And that is why 14 Democratic state senators in Wisconsin went AWOL today. They refused to turn up for the anti-union vote scheduled in the state Senate today. Right around noon, these Democrats just disappeared. And in their absence, the Republicans could not get a quorum, and therefore they were unable to hold their big anti-union vote, which they plan to hold today and they plan to win. To avoid the threat of being forcibly returned to the state capitol, Democratic senators did not just not turn up at the state legislature today, they fled the state. What is happening in Wisconsin right now is not about the budget. It is not about teacher tenure. It is not about whether or not librarians have too good a dental plan. That is not what this is about. This is about Republicans versus Democrats and whether or not the Democratic Party will continue to compete with the Republican Party. Whether or not the Democratic Party will continue to exist in any meaningful sense. One of the Democratic state senators who fled the state today in order to block this bill will join us from an undisclosed location next.